Today we are building the Jade Chamber from Genshin Impact in Minecraft, and as you can see we are starting with a giant circle. This build took me about 20 hours to build, so consider subscribing. It's free and you can always undo it later. Enjoy! To make the giant circle I used a webpage called Circle and Oval Generator, which I use pretty much every time I have to create a circle in Minecraft, because they are banned, they are illegal. This circle has the width and the height of 101 blocks. It's a pretty big circle, took a while to build as well, and for some reason I did little circles in the giant circle. I don't know why, but I did, and it's kinda satisfying to look at. And now we have a giant circle. And then I started building the circular platforms. Jeez, I wonder how many times I've said circle so far. Probably too many, to be honest. I made the outline for the other circles, and I cannot emphasize enough how much counting and recounting is important when building symmetrical builds. It's better to go back and forth multiple times than build something one block off and then having to rebuild the entire thing. And I would know, because I had to do just that quite a few times during this build. Why? Well, because I'm apparently not very good at counting. While finishing the third one of these platforms, I realized that when the build is finished, the circle you saw just now will be the only one which you'll be able to see in its full glory. This is because this one is on the east side, and in Genshin Impact the Jade Chamber is facing northeast, and on the other three platforms there are three towers connected by a wall, so the platforms can actually be seen. This is why I only ended up building 3 of the platforms, because I thought it would be stupid to build the last one in full if you won't even be able to see it, but I still ended up building it later on. You can also see me shifting one of them because I miscounted the blocks and placed it wrong first time round. Now I'm building the pathways that connect the platforms, and I believe I made them slightly too narrow, but oh well, they work well enough. Following that, I started working on the central platform, which works as a pedestal for the central build, and this is also the only place in this entire build where you can go and touch grass. Sad. Just sad. Fitting for a Genshin player. What grass? All we know is the Dendro element. And yet again, you can see me filling in the octagons, which I do not actually have to fill in, since there will be a whole build on it anyways. And now I'm deleting the giant circle that took me forever to build, just so I can start working on the giant artificial lake of a pool. I wonder how much actual force would be needed to keep all that water at 1000 meters from the ground. After creating the border of the pool and filling in the floor, I had to go in and place a bunch of water by hand. And you might ask yourself, why? Why would they do that? It's because I used so many stairs and I had to waterlog them all so that they would look good. My plan was to use ice to fill it in completely, but I soon realized that it doesn't work like that anymore. Now you have to have a water source block beneath the ice for it to actually turn into water, which meant that I had to place the whole second layer of water by hand as well, just so I could then break the ice and fill in the topmost layer. And the pool is complete. Nice. Finally, I could start working on the actual building. I mostly used quartz and dark oak wood because they contrast incredibly well. The ground floor actually has a slight tilt to it in Genshin, and that is really hard to translate to Minecraft because the cubes make everything very rigid. I dealt with it by going one block in the middle of the wall, and I think it works perfectly fine. The second floor was much easier to do shape-wise. It's just a straight octagon. I did struggle with the roof though. I couldn't quite figure out how much slant it needs and how far out it should stretch, and you can see that it looks a bit odd. And then I lost my footage. Again, which I'm still really mad about because this was like 2 hours of work, of decorating. At this point, it's part of the brand. As you can see, I deleted the roof and added in a lot of details. If you look closely, you can see that I used a lot of fences, slabs and trapdoors, which all help to give a build depth. And so I redid the roof that looked oh so odd earlier. You know how much I love building roofs, they are definitely my favorite part of any build. I'm being extremely sarcastic right now, I fucking hate roofs. And I believe it looks much better now. I think that about 30%, wait, no, it has to be at least 50% of the whole build are just roofs in different shapes and with different slants. Fun. In many of my builds you can see me making the arch first and then filling in the middle parts, which actually really helps with getting the general shape of the roof. It's one of the best tips if you ask me. I soon ended up adding a bit of height to the roof because I didn't quite like how flat it looked from afar. As you can see, I first picked birch to be the color of the roof, but I later changed it to oak. Don't worry, I actually did use commands this time. However, a lot of the stuff still ended up getting scuffed, and I had to fix that by hand. It was still a lot quicker than doing it all by hand though. The reason I changed it from birch to oak is that I thought birch looked too white, and the roof of the Jade Chamber has a sort of golden glow to it. If you look closely, it's actually made of bamboo, so I'm a little bit sad that the bamboo blocks are not yet fully implemented in Minecraft. So yeah, the central build is almost done. The only thing left are a few tiny floors and a bell-shaped roof on top. The thing I actually want to talk about are these lanterns. I cannot put into words how much I enjoy building them. They are so simple and yet they add so much. If you wanted to, you could make them much more complicated, but I think this fit this build perfectly. Now that the main building is done, we can start working on the 3 towers and the bridges that connect them to the main build. The bridges were pretty simple to make, but I feel like they might have ended up being slightly too wide, though that is not a huge problem. The lower part of the tower has a slanted wall just like the ground floor of the main building, so I used the same technique as before. Other than that, the design is pretty simple and it copies a lot of elements from the central build. For the towers, I decided to use the in-game lanterns instead of the custom ones I talked about earlier, because I felt like they would be too unproportionally large and would overshadow the other parts of the tower. Moving on to the tower in the back, it was only when I started building it that I realized that it's actually different from the towers on the sides. It's a bit taller and has more floors, but it's not much harder to build as the floors repeat themselves. I think this might actually be my favorite tower, and I'm a bit sad it's placed in the back and can't actually be seen from the front. The last tower, as said before, is just a copy of the first, so there really isn't much to say. Here I started working on the walls, and I'll admit this wasn't the most exciting part of the build, but it made a huge difference. Still, I had some trouble with building it. First, I miscounted the wooden pillars and I made 8 of them instead of 7, but that was a pretty easy fix. You know, you just remove one of them from each side. I also couldn't really decide how to make the windows because I always used oak trapdoors, but here they have a curve to them, which makes this a lot harder. I ended up using orange stained glass and I think it looks pretty good. The palette is pretty much the same as before, but the passage ended up being really narrow and not very functional. You can still technically walk on it, but either way it's not too much of a problem since you can't really get up there unless you go through the towers, which do not have an inside anyway. Not in Genshin and not in my build. You can now see me actually make the roof of the passage, and I struggled a bit with how narrow it was, but still I think it ended up looking alright. The roof is a bit funky and not really straight, but neither am I, and I think that's alright. So now we're working on the plants, and this is always my favorite part of any build. I think it actually gives life to the build itself. It makes it so much, it makes it feel complete, and it pushes it to the next level, especially when it comes to terraforming in like not flat worlds. And it takes so little, like it's so fast. Place some bone meal and grass and flowers and you're done. But for the bottom part, I actually thought it would take me like so much less time than it actually did. It took forever, and you can actually see it because it's all in like the shadowed part, especially with shaders. It's just darkness, and this is very speed up. It's more speed up than the rest of the build is, but like I didn't want to just leave it a floating circle with the top of the build and the rest of the build missing. It would feel incomplete.